Hi, my name is Rowenna, and my brother-in-law screamed at me the day I told him I knew. Not just about one forged loan, but seven. 7 signatures, 7 lies, and over $1 million that were never mine. They told me to keep quiet, that it was just paperwork, that family doesn't go to the cops. Even my own mother said, "It's just your name." But what if your name is the only thing keeping you sane? What if the people you trust most are the ones rewriting your life behind your back? And what if the silence you kept wasn't loyalty, but evidence? So I stayed quiet until the FBI knocked. Want to know what they found? The voicemail came in at 9:12 a.m. on a Thursday morning, just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. I remember the time exactly because I always check the clock before heading to the laundry room. Habit. Mobile mornings were slow, especially in February, and I wasn't expecting anything more urgent than a new gas bill. But this message changed everything. "Miss Rowenna, this is Halverson from First Union Bank. I was hoping you could return my call. There's a discrepancy with your signature on a recent loan file. It's urgent." I didn't call back right away. I listened to the message twice, then 3 times. There had to be some mistake. I hadn't signed anything in months, years maybe. I lived off what Harold left me and what I managed to bring in from a few small freelance clients. Nothing extravagant, nothing risky. Still, my hand shook as I dialed back. "Miss Whitmore." The man's voice was even and professional. "Can you confirm the signature on the documents tied to the commercial property on Callahan Street?" I stared at the kitchen tiles as if the answer might be written between the grout. "I've never even been to Callahan Street," I said, "let alone signed anything for property there." He paused, a soft click of keys. "The signature looks identical to yours. Initials match, date aligns with last week." My mouth was dry. "I didn't sign a thing." "All right," he said carefully. "I just needed to verify. The loan is for $1.2 million. It's already been processed." And just like that, my morning shattered. I didn't hang up. I didn't cry. I wrote down every detail he gave me. Loan ID, timestamps, the name of the notary. And then I drove straight to my mother's. Avis lived just across town, in the same house she'd been in since Dad passed. Familiar curtains, same floral carpet. It smelled of lemon oil and denial. Harlan was already there. He sat on the recliner like it was his throne, TV volume too loud, sipping from a glass like nothing in the world could touch him. I didn't wait for pleasantries. "You took out a loan, in my name." He looked up, blinking. "Excuse me?" "You forged my name," I said, voice low but sharp. $1.2 million for Callahan Street. You really thought I wouldn't find out?" He stood up too fast, like the accusation had lit a fuse. "What the hell are you talking about, Ro?" he barked. "I don't need your damn name on anything." "I got a call from the bank this morning," I said, not blinking. "They showed me the documents." He laughed, loud and mean. "You think I forged you? Who do you think you are? You're not that important. You don't even matter in this family." Avis appeared in the doorway, apron still tied around her waist. "Harlan, what's going on?" "She's accusing me of fraud," he shouted. "That's what's going on, after all I've done for this family." I turned to my mother. "They have documents. With my name, my signature, I didn't sign them." She looked between us, uncertain, almost uncomfortable. "Let's not fight. It's probably a misunderstanding." I'd never felt smaller. As I drove home, headlights carving through the quiet night, I couldn't stop replaying that moment. Not just his voice, not just the way he twisted it back onto me, but my mother's silence, the shrug in her eyes, the way she wanted to believe him more than she wanted to question him. Years ago, he had asked me, casually, over dinner, to co-sign something for liquidity purposes. That's what he called it, liquidity. I had declined, politely, firmly. But maybe he didn't need my permission after all. Maybe all he needed was a scanned form. Maybe just one signature from a birthday card, a note, anything to trace. At home, I pulled out every drawer in my office. Old taxes, utility bills, a folder labeled 2009, rental application. Nothing recent, nothing useful. I opened my email, typed Harlan into the search bar. A few forwarded jokes, a calendar invite from 3 years ago. Nothing that pointed to this. I clicked into the attachments from the bank. 3 PDF files. I zoomed in on the signature block. Rowenna Whitmore. My name. My cursive. Only, it wasn't mine. The slant was off. The tail on the W curled just a bit too tight. I printed the page, grabbed a red pen, circled the signature, stared at it for a long time. "That's not my signature," I whispered to the empty room. "But I know exactly who wrote it." I walked to the far cabinet, pulled open the lowest drawer. Behind a set of expired checks and a metal money clip was a small black flash drive. I hadn't touched it in years, but something told me I'd need it now. I thought the worst was over, until I saw the second loan. It was 6:43 the next morning when I opened the email from Mr. Halverson. I hadn't slept much. The kitchen was still dark except for the under-cabinet light glowing softly against the counter. My coffee sat untouched beside me, growing cold while I clicked through attachments that should have never existed. The subject line read, "Additional verification needed. Urgent." Another loan. Same bank. Same signature. Same name. Mine. But I hadn't signed it. Again. I stared at the document long enough for the words to blur. The loan was even larger this time. A new property, different location. The date of the signature was just 5 days ago, while I'd been at home doing taxes, not signing over my identity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional, calculated, rehearsed. I drove to my mother's house an hour later, the copy of the second loan in my purse. The roads were quiet, like they always were early on a Friday. Mobile didn't rush into anything, not even Betrayal, it seemed. I parked in the same spot I always used, next to the bird bath she hadn't cleaned in years. Avis was in the kitchen, slicing bananas into her cereal. She didn't look up when I walked in. "I made coffee," she said casually, as if I wasn't unraveling at the seams. I dropped the manila envelope on the table. "Another one." She finally looked at me. "What's that?" "Another loan. Another signature that isn't mine. This one for $1.7 million. She blinked, slow. "Rowenna, you're blowing this way out of proportion." My jaw clenched. "Blowing it out of, Mom, someone forged my name, twice. That's not something you sweep under the rug like dust. It's just your name on a piece of paper. Maybe he thought it would speed things along." Speed things along? As if $3 million in fraud was the same as signing for a pizza delivery. "He forged me, Mom," I said, my voice tight. "That's a federal offense." She sighed, picked up her spoon. "You always did make everything so dramatic." I almost laughed. It was the kind of laugh that sat somewhere between heartbreak and fury. "He's your brother-in-law," she continued, almost scolding. "He's family." I leaned in. "So am I." She didn't respond. Back in the car, I sat for a full 10 minutes before starting the engine. The paper was still in my lap. Legal, stamped, professionally filed, and completely fake. It triggered a memory I hadn't visited in years. 3 years ago, Harlan had casually mentioned needing a co-signer. He phrased it like a joke over Thanksgiving dinner. "Just a quick signature, Ro. Liquidity is everything these days." I'd declined. But now I wondered, had he taken something then? A form? A copy of my license? A birthday card I'd signed? Anything to mimic my script. I remembered reading an article about it once. Family forgery fraud. A real term. It was happening more and more to older women, especially those who trusted the wrong relatives. Trust wasn't a gift anymore. It was a weakness someone like Harlan could exploit. Just as I pulled into my driveway, a beige sedan slowed in front of my house. A man stepped out, suit pressed, clipboard in hand. He approached with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ms. Whitmore?" I nodded cautiously. "This is from Mr. Doyle's office." He handed me an envelope with a sticky note attached. The handwriting was unmistakably Harlan's. "Just sign. Make it all easier." Inside was an adjustment agreement. Legal jargon filled every line, but one thing was clear. Signing it meant validating both fraudulent loans, as if they had my full consent from the beginning. I didn't even walk inside. I stood on the porch, reading every line. The phrasing was designed to confuse. Complex. Overlapping clauses. The kind of language that made victims complicit without realizing it. It wasn't cleanup, it was a trap. Back inside, I paced, my stomach twisted with each step. I picked up the phone and called the only person I trusted with this. Carmine? Ro, she answered. You okay? Can I send you something? I need you to read it. Carefully. Send it now. I'm at my desk. I scanned the document, emailed it with shaking hands. Within 5 minutes, she called back. Don't you dare sign that, she said. That's entrapment. You sign that, and you've admitted guilt. They're trying to backdate consent to cover their own fraud. I sat down, heart pounding. What do I do? You do nothing yet, Carmine said. We start building quietly. I'll help you. But don't make a move until we've got ground to stand on. Her voice was calm, steady. She'd always been that way, even back in undergrad when our professors threw curveballs and half the class cracked. She never did. I didn't reply to the courier. Instead, I walked to my desk, took the adjustment agreement, and placed it back in the envelope. On a yellow post-it, I wrote one sentence, "You already forged me once." I sealed it, wrote Harlan's name on the front. The next morning, I dropped it in the mailbox. Empty. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened every folder on my computer, every file, every scan, every name he might have used me for. It was time to go through every document he had ever touched. That night, I started reading every document he ever touched. It was nearly midnight. I had turned off every light in the house except the one above the dining table. A stack of folders sat beside me, some yellowed with age, others crisp and recently mailed. My laptop was open, and I had 3 different PDF viewers running side by side. I didn't know what I was hoping to find, or maybe I did. By 1:30 a.m., the pattern was impossible to ignore. 7 different documents with my name, my handwriting. Or rather, what looked like my handwriting, until you paid close attention. The R was a little too curled, the spacing between my first and last name slightly off. The tail of the W dipped more dramatically than I'd ever written it in my life. 7 separate signatures, spread across 4 years. A property flip proposal I never filed. A car lease for a Lexus I never drove. 2 co-signed contracts for loans I'd never heard of. All linked to Harlan. It wasn't a mistake. It was a method. Each one chipped away at the trust I didn't even realize I'd been rationing. It wasn't just betrayal. It was familiarity weaponized. He didn't need access to my bank login or a key to my house. He had access to my handwriting, my patterns, my silence. And worst of all, he knew I'd been too polite, too cautious, too conflict-averse to ever push back. Until now. Somewhere in that haze of documents and dread, a memory clawed its way up. It was Thanksgiving. 5 years ago, we were gathered in the living room, full from dinner, the TV humming with football noise in the background. Harlan had pulled me aside while everyone else was in the kitchen. He'd said something like, "Ro, I just need a quick favor. 5 grand. Just for a week. 10 days tops. Got a deposit due on a flip property and the bank's dragging." At the time, it felt small. He was family. It was the holiday. I remember pulling the money from my savings and Venmoing it before dessert was even served. He never paid it back, never brought it up again. Back then, I told myself it wasn't worth the strain. It was just money. Letting it go was easier than dragging it into daylight. Now I knew better. He hadn't borrowed $5,000. He'd purchased my future hesitation. He bought my silence at a discount. I closed my laptop and sat back in the chair. The silence was too thick, like the room itself was holding its breath. Then I did what I should have done months ago, maybe years. I created a folder on my desktop and labeled it Harlan Evidence, not subtle, not encrypted, just honest. I took photos of each document, labeled the images with dates, uploaded backups to a secure cloud drive and onto an old USB I hadn't touched since 2017. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was preparation. The next morning, I was still awake when Carmine called. Her voice was tired but focused. I read the documents. You weren't exaggerating. I never do, I said, pouring myself the first coffee of the day that I'd actually drink. I ran them through a comparison scanner, she continued. These qualify as forgeries. He's crossed into criminal territory, wire fraud, forgery, maybe even identity theft, depending on how the funds moved. And the bank? I asked. They won't press until they're forced to. But if we build a timeline, I already started one, I interrupted. 7 documents, 4 years, all tied back to him. There was a pause on her end. Then, you've been preparing for this longer than you think. Maybe she was right. She advised me to hold steady. Don't send anything yet. Let him think you're still spinning. I agreed. Silence had always been his weapon. Now it was mine. Around 2:15 that afternoon, I was rinsing dishes when I heard something slide under my front door. I dried my hands, picked up the envelope on the floor. It was a plain manila file. No markings. No return address. Inside were 3 new loan applications. Each one bore my name. Each signature was a mockery. Sloppy, uneven, desperate. They weren't even good copies. It was like he stopped trying to hide the forgery, like he wanted me to know it was him. And in that moment, I finally did. This wasn't him covering his tracks. This was him doubling down. The moment I saw those new pages, I knew he wasn't done. The moment I saw those new pages, I knew he wasn't done. They weren't even subtle this time. The signatures looked like someone had traced my name with their non-dominant hand. Sloppy. Desperate. But legally, they were close enough to raise flags. And worse, to delay the truth. I spread them across the dining table alongside the others. 7, now 10. 10 forged documents under my name, each more reckless than the last. I'd hoped that confronting Harlan would end this. That maybe, just maybe, he'd back off when I started pushing. But men like him didn't retreat. They escalated. My phone buzzed at noon. Harlan. Lunch? He texted. Just to talk. I didn't answer right away. I stared at the message, thinking of the last time I saw him smirk in my mother's living room like he owned the place. But something in me shifted. I said yes. Not because I wanted peace, but because I wanted proof. We met at a diner near Mom's neighborhood. One of those old places with cracked red booths and waitresses who called everyone Hun. I got there early, sat with my purse on the inside, and waited. I'd already tucked the voice recorder inside the lining. Carmine had told me Alabama was a one-party consent state. As long as I was part of the conversation, I could legally record anything. Harlan walked in 15 minutes late, smelling like cheap cologne and borrowed confidence. He ordered a burger he didn't touch and leaned back like this was a casual family check-in. "Ro," he said, folding his napkin too perfectly, "you're making a mess out of something that could have been handled quietly." "I'm not the one forging names," I replied. He laughed. "Oh, come on. Don't act like this is some grand betrayal. It's just business, paper, a few signatures. You know how banks work. Slow and flexible. Sometimes you gotta bend things to keep them moving." "And when the bending turns into breaking?" He shrugged. "You've always been dramatic." Then he leaned in slightly and dropped the line that sealed his fate. "She'll never see it coming," he muttered, almost to himself. "That woman still thinks family loyalty means silence." I didn't blink. I didn't let it show. I smiled, took a sip of my iced tea, said nothing. Later that evening, I played the recording for Carmine. She was silent for the first minute and then said, "Ro, you just recorded your own insurance policy." We talked for nearly 2 hours. She laid out a plan, timeline, documentation, legal strategy. Her voice was calm but firm. "We build slow," she said. "You don't give him the war he wants. You give him facts, dates, and federal violations." I agreed. I was tired of emotional fireworks. I wanted clean, sharp lines, like a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. But just as I thought things were aligning, my mother called. "Dinner tomorrow night," she said. "Just family, no drama." I should have known better. I showed up the next evening to find not just my mother, but my sister Clara, two cousins I hadn't seen in years, and a cold pot roast already carved. Harlan wasn't there, but his fingerprints were all over the setup. Clara was the first to speak. "Ro, what are you doing?" "What do you mean?" I asked, standing by the doorway. "You're blowing up the family," she snapped. "Over some paperwork?" I laughed. It came out dry. "Paperwork that could get me indicted." "It's just your name," one cousin chimed in. "It's not like he took your kidney." Avis, my mother, sat at the head of the table, silent, watching, like a judge waiting to see how her daughters would perform. "Mom?" I asked. She looked up. "He didn't mean to hurt anyone." And there it was. Harlan had gotten to all of them first, poisoned the well, fed them the narrative of the bitter spinster sister who couldn't let go, made them believe I was the problem. I set my purse down gently. "I'll make this very clear," I said. "When the subpoenas come, when the investigators start calling, I don't want to hear that you didn't know. Wire fraud carries up to 20 years in federal prison. You might think it's just paperwork now, but when your names are on CC'd emails and joint accounts, the story changes." Clara's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't." "I already did," I said. I walked out before anyone could answer. No one followed. Back in my car, I sat in the driveway and stared out at the neighborhood I used to know. Porch lights flickered on one by one. The air smelled like cut grass and fried food from someone's open window. Then my phone buzzed. Blocked number. One text. "You think you're clever? You just made yourself a target." I didn't flinch. I didn't panic. I just locked my doors, one by one. Because that's when I started locking every door, even during the day. That's when I started locking every door, even during the day. I changed the locks myself the next morning. I didn't want anyone else in my space, even if they were just there to help. I bought a new keypad for the back door, reinforced the windows in the laundry room, and installed a second camera over the garage. The last one, my hallway camera, I didn't trust anymore. 2 nights ago, the footage had looked off, slightly skewed. I remembered placing it to catch the angle of the front foyer. Now it pointed more toward the coat closet. I hadn't touched it. I went through the footage again. 36 hours of video. At 3:04 a.m., yesterday, the hallway went black for exactly 43 seconds. Then the angle changed. No one appeared on screen. Nothing tripped the motion sensor. Just silence. Then a shift. Someone had been inside. Someone with access. Or the ability to bypass mine. By mid-afternoon, I was no longer angry. I was clear. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about leverage, power. Harlan had moved beyond my name and into my surroundings, into my home. I logged back into the lending network I'd begun watching obsessively. The dashboard refreshed. A new file had popped up in the queue. My mother's name, but the signature, again, was mine. Different loan provider, different terms. Her name at the top, my forged signature at the bottom. He was using her as a buffer now. Hiding behind her good credit, shielding his crimes in her name. It hit me harder than any of his previous forgeries. I stared at the screen. My mother hadn't even wanted to hear me out last week, had dismissed the first loan like it was a parking ticket, and now, without her even realizing it, she was next. We were both pawns, but she didn't know she was on the board. I called Carmine. "I found something new," I said, before she could even say hello. "Another signature? Under my mom's name." She was quiet for a second. Then, "This is how they move when they know it's almost over. Fast. Sloppy." I told her about the camera, too. The shifted angle, the blackout. Carmine didn't sound surprised. "He's desperate now. People like Harlan don't retreat gracefully. They push until someone pins them down. I want to start locking down everything. Financials, credit watch, legal filings. Already sent the paperwork to 2 institutions this morning. I'll send you a draft letter you can use as a universal notice." She paused before adding, "Just be careful, Ro. When men like this feel cornered, they don't always act smart, but they do act dangerous." I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence. Then I wrote, One page. No emotion, no apology, just a direct statement. Any further financial activity tied to my name or my mother's will trigger legal action. No warning, no negotiation. I printed 2 copies. One for Harlan, one for Avis. I didn't trust email. I didn't trust conversations. I used a courier, tracked delivery. I watched the status update on the app as the documents were signed for. One at his office, one at her porch. I didn't expect them to listen, but I needed it documented. That night, as I came back from Carmine's office after signing another set of legal affidavits, something caught my eye on the front door. A red envelope. No stamp. No markings. Just taped, dead center. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten. Large strokes. Heavy pressure. You want war? You got it. No signature. No date. Just a promise. I held it in my hands for a moment, then folded it once, placed it in the drawer next to the rest of the evidence. And that was the moment I knew. He never planned to stop unless someone made him. And that was the moment I knew. He never planned to stop unless someone made him. I spent the next 2 hours pacing the perimeter of my house, testing locks, changing passcodes, double-checking the system notifications from every camera feed. Even the keypad entry logs. Everything had to be airtight. There's something primal about being hunted in your own home, even if it's just a note taped to a door. A predator doesn't need to break the door down, he just needs you to know he can. By noon, I was back in front of my laptop, answering emails, sorting files, trying to steady myself. That's when it happened. Ping. A new email slid into my inbox with a subject line that read like a threat disguised as customer service. Confirmation request. Refinancing application. My stomach turned. It was from a loan processing firm I'd never interacted with. My full legal name was used. The tone was friendly, polished. It thanked me for my participation in a commercial refinance tied to a limited liability company I'd never heard of, Mason Harbor Holdings. The email asked me to confirm some final details. It even provided a convenient link. Just one click. I didn't click. I screenshotted the whole thing and forwarded it to Carmine. 2 minutes later, she called me. Do not reply, not even to deny. That's bait. I exhaled, finally, after what felt like an entire day without air. He's building a fake paper trail, isn't he? He's using fake entities and masking them as legitimate activity. If you respond, even with a "this isn't me," it'll be twisted into implied consent. It's a tactic. I stared at the screen. He's using email like he used my signature. Exactly. And now we escalate too. She brought in a contact from her cybersecurity network. They traced the origin of the message. Not to my IP, but to 1 digit off. Same ISP, same block, just enough to look familiar to someone skimming a report. A mirrored shadow of my network, spoofed. He's faking your digital footprint, Carmine said. Not just your name anymore. He's trying to recreate you. The very thought made me feel like a ghost in my own skin. We sat in quiet coordination for the next hour, assembling digital affidavits and preparing data packets. Carmine worked with clinical calm, but even she paused when a new letter arrived, this time from Harlan's attorney. A cease and desist. I read the first paragraph out loud. Our client, Mr. Harlan Doyle, has been subjected to a series of defamatory claims and coordinated harassment by Ms. Rowenna Whitmore, including slanderous accusations that have disrupted familial harmony and personal safety. I laughed. Actually laughed. Carmine didn't. They're playing the silence means consent angle. If you don't respond legally, they'll claim you agree by omission. They're trying to push me into defending myself preemptively, which creates an appearance of conflict where you're the aggressor. Classic smoke and mirrors, but now they've stepped into our territory. We prepped our own legal reply. Mine was short, direct. To whom it may concern, if any institution processes documentation using my identity, legal or digital, without verified written consent, they are participating in active fraud. Any further manipulation will result in federal charges, and this message serves as formal notice. That afternoon, I mailed notarized versions to every credit agency and financial firm Harlan had touched. Not one apology, not one soft word. This wasn't family business anymore. This was war in ink and liability. The day wound down into dusk. I made dinner, a grilled cheese I barely touched. I took a call from my cousin Vanessa. Brief, awkward. She asked if I was really going through with all this. "It's already been done," I said. She sighed, long and exhausted. "He says you're doing this out of spite." I didn't reply. I just ended the call. At 12:08 a.m., my phone buzzed with a new email. No sender listed. Just an encrypted address that looked like a string of gibberish. Subject line, "Final offer." I clicked only to preview, never to download. The body of the message read, "Walk away, or what happens next is on you." No signature, no threat spelled out, but the message was loud. I didn't walk. I ran, straight toward every document he'd ever touched. I didn't walk. I ran, straight toward every document he'd ever touched. At 6:05 that morning, I was already sitting in front of my computer, a cup of stale coffee untouched beside me. The silence in the house felt different, less like peace and more like suspense. I opened the state property database first, then tax records, then court dockets in 3 different counties. I followed every thread Harlan had left behind like it was a trail of gasoline leading to the fire. He wasn't just messy, he was arrogant. One name came up again and again on outdated listings: Lenora Doyle, listed as a co-owner, a witness, a personal guarantor. Then, suddenly, she disappeared from the trail around 2013. It didn't take much digging. People like Harlan always leave behind a mess, if you look deep enough. By 9:15, an email slid into my inbox. Subject line, "You're not alone." I paused, opened it, Lenora Doyle. That same name. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Her message was brief. "I know what he's doing. He did it to me. I'm willing to talk. I have proof." Attached were 3 court documents, a 2012 bankruptcy case, a civil fraud suit that never made it to trial, and a personal statement, signed and notarized, naming Harlan as the man who cost her everything. I didn't even finish reading before I called Carmine. "This changes the tone," she said. "This isn't just family anymore. This is pattern, precedent, criminal history." I called Lenora 2 hours later. She picked up like she'd been expecting me. "Rowenna," she said. Her voice was calm, worn but steady. "He has a formula: charm, pressure, forgery. He pushes until you break, and then he plays the victim." We talked for nearly an hour. Lenora was Harlan's former business partner and the ex-wife of his late brother Patrick. That piece hit harder than I thought it would. She wasn't just an ex. She had been in the family, like me, trusted, exploited. "He asked me to sign a blank financial authorization once," she said. "Said it was just to simplify a loan. I trusted him. Next thing I knew, I was listed as the primary on a $300,000 business debt. I lost my house." I asked why she never came forward. "I did. No one listened. And when I finally sued, he spun it so hard I looked like a bitter ex. That's what he does. And you? You're the next target." She emailed me her affidavit within the hour. Scanned court transcripts, financial records, even a draft power of attorney document, unsigned, but obviously written with one goal: control. I saved everything, printed it out, filed it chronologically with the others in a new tab I created. Pattern of behavior. I forwarded the entire folder to Carmine. That evening, I stopped by her office. We spread out everything across the large table in her conference room. Every forged document, every quote, every timestamp. Lenora's affidavit sat at the center. "This is enough to push criminal charges," Carmine said, "but we'll need one more solid tie." We didn't have to wait long. The next morning, Carmine called me, her voice unusually tight. "I found a note on my windshield," she said. "No envelope, no signature." "What did it say?" "Lawyers don't always win, especially nosy ones." It took me a full second to process the audacity. "You okay?" I asked. "I'm fine, but this means he's cracking. That wasn't a threat. That was fear with handwriting." I drove over to her office. We filed a formal report with local authorities, just in case. She didn't flinch once, not even when the officer asked if we felt in personal danger. "This isn't about danger," Carmine said flatly. "It's about justice." Later that night, Lenora and I spoke again, this time via video call. Her face was lined, her hair pulled back. There was a strength there I recognized, a survivor's stillness. "You're not the only one who gave up her peace to keep the peace," she said. She showed me a file marked Contingency Plan. Inside were scanned files of all her prior evidence. She hadn't given up. She'd just been waiting for someone else who believed her. "This time," I said, "we do it right." As the sun dipped behind the trees outside my window, I sat alone at the kitchen table, drafting what would become my master timeline: dates, names, forged papers, emotional leverage points, even voicemail logs. I was halfway through labeling one of the older scanned PDFs when my phone rang. "Restricted number." I answered. No hello, just a man's voice, low, deliberate. 2 women down didn't stop him. "What makes you think you're different?" Silence. Then the click. I stared at the phone for a beat, heart pounding, but not from fear, from certainty. This time, I wouldn't just gather proof. I'd weaponize it. This time, I wouldn't just gather proof. I'd weaponize it. By dawn, my dining table looked more like a war room. Documents spread in neat rows, each labeled in black Sharpie. Property fraud, ID theft, signature analysis, Lenora. My laptop was open to a secure cloud drive. I replayed every recording, cross-checked every timestamp. Lenora's affidavits were printed and stacked. Carmine had added footnotes, legal flags, even FBI statutes that lined up like dominoes ready to fall. Around 8:17 a.m., an email pinged my inbox with a subject line I didn't expect. "You helped me once. Now it's my turn." It was from Betrayal. I hadn't heard from her since 2019. She used to work at the bank that Harlan abused the most. We weren't close. I helped her quietly once during a temporary housing mess, helped her notarize documents when she had no one else. Attached were 3 files, internal memos, screenshots of back-end approvals. One line jumped out and punched the air out of my lungs. "Override accepted. Client has family co-signature on record. Flag cleared." That co-signer was me. It was the missing piece, the insider detail Harlan never thought would surface. She wrote one line at the end of her email that still clings to me. "Some people pretend to be wolves. Others are. You gave me shelter. This is mine." With Carmine's help, we secured all digital trails and encrypted the entire file set. Then, at 2:14 p.m., we pressed send to the FBI. The upload included 8 separate audio recordings, Lenora's full affidavit and notarized timeline, Mireille's bank documentation network logs, signature analysis, and forged loan trail. A detailed visual timeline from 2017 to 2023. I didn't send it to ruin him. I sent it because he'd already ruined enough. 3 hours later, I was in my mother's kitchen, invited under the pretense of a family dinner. The pot roast was overcooked. The tension was raw. Harlan arrived 30 minutes late, smirking like he knew something no one else did. Avis sat stiff in her usual seat, napkin folded into a neat triangle, her silence louder than anything spoken. I stood up without touching my plate. "Harlan," I said calmly, "you used my name. You used my mother's name. You threatened a federal officer's relative. You forged 7 separate documents." He froze mid-sip. Everyone else stopped breathing. "And now," I said, "you'll answer to someone who's not me." I pulled a file from my bag and laid it on the table, 1 copy for each person. "You're distributing lies," he snapped, voice rising. "This is slander. You have no proof." I tilted my head. "The FBI disagrees." Avis looked at me, then at the file in front of her. Her hands trembled slightly. Clara whispered, "What is this?" "Everything," I said. "Every lie, every theft, every forged contract, names, banks, dates, codes. You can pretend I'm making noise. But the government just hit record." Harlan stood, knocking his chair backward. "You want to destroy this family?" he yelled. "That's what you're doing." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, I don't need you to confess. I just need you to prepare. He stormed out without touching his food. No one followed. Avis sat in silence. She looked smaller somehow, like something inside her had finally cracked. I didn't stay long. I said goodbye without hugging anyone, gathered my bag, and walked out. The files were left behind, right where they needed to be. That night, I made tea I didn't drink, checked the locks twice, watched the shadows shift across the living room walls. At 10:47 p.m., a new email arrived from the FBI. We'd like to speak further. What you've submitted may be larger than you think. I thought it ended with him. I didn't realize how far the damage spread. I didn't realize how far the damage spread. I woke up to 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails, and 1 text message from my neighbor Marcia. You might want to check Channel 7. I turned on the TV, still in my robe, fingers stiff from sleep. The footage wasn't grainy. It was sharp, clear, almost cinematic. There he was. Harlan, standing on his front porch in a gray robe, hair wild, hands in the air. FBI agents flanked him on both sides. One read him his rights. Another stood in the background, holding a thick manila folder, the kind I had learned to fear and fill in equal measure. He screamed something about being framed, about enemies in the family, about conspiracies. But no one was listening. They put him in the back of a black SUV and drove off without so much as a glance at the house behind him. The clip looped once, then cut to a news anchor explaining the charges: wire fraud, document forgery, identity theft, obstruction of justice. His business had been marked closed for investigation. The headline crawled across the bottom of the screen like a slow verdict. I didn't feel triumph. Not exactly. It was something colder, something quieter. Less than an hour later, I got another call, this one from Lisa, the neighbor who lived across from my mother. Ro, she said breathlessly. Your mom. I think she fainted. She won't speak. I drove over without grabbing my coat. Avis was slumped in her recliner, eyes open but unfocused, a half-eaten piece of toast on a plate beside her. She didn't react when I knelt beside her. She saw the arrest, Lisa said. Then she just kind of shut down. We called an ambulance. They took her to the ER for monitoring. No signs of a stroke, thank God, but her heart was stressed. Her blood pressure was high. The doctor spoke in calm, vague language, too vague for my nerves. I sat in the waiting room for hours, watching the second hand on the wall clock crawl. The same looped footage of Harlan played on the hospital's muted lobby TV. And then, of course, one of them showed up. Karen, my cousin. She walked straight toward me and didn't bother sitting. Just stood there, arms crossed. Happy now? She asked. I didn't lift my head. Is that really what you want to say here? In a hospital? You humiliated the family. No, I said, voice level. He did that. I just stopped letting him get away with it. She scoffed, turned to leave, then added over her shoulder, You always were good at making yourself the victim. I didn't bite, but inside I wanted to scream. Back in the waiting room, I stared at the floor tiles, waiting for a nurse, a doctor, anyone to explain what was next. I kept thinking about that line Harlan loved to use. It's not personal, it's business, and how he'd always said it after doing something unforgivable. Later that evening, Carmine called. Charges are confirmed, she said. They're setting a preliminary court date for next month. Bail was denied. The judge cited risk of flight. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. And the press? Some articles are floating, mostly local. You're not named, just referred to as a family member and whistleblower. You want me to keep it that way? Yes. There was a pause. Then, you did the right thing, Ro. It doesn't feel like it. Right rarely does. Not at first. I left the hospital around 10:30. Avis was stable, sleeping. The nurses promised to call if anything changed. As I pulled into my street, the headlights caught something odd. A car, black, parked 2 houses down, windows tinted, no movement inside. I'd seen it earlier that day, and once the day before that. I parked, turned off my lights, and waited. The car didn't move. but it didn't leave either. I walked to my front door slowly, keys ready, bag held tight. And that's when I knew Harlan wasn't the only one watching. The black car sat across the street for nearly 2 hours that morning. I watched from behind the curtain, coffee in hand, scribbling the license plate on the back of an old envelope. Eventually, I called the number the FBI had given me, the contact from their financial crimes division. "It's likely one of ours," the agent said after taking the plate. "We've got more threads to pull, but rest assured, he's not the hunter anymore." I nodded, even though no one could see me. Something in my chest loosened. Not relief exactly, but the shift from defense to control. Later that week, I got the call from Carmine. "The court is requesting testimony from you," she said. "They're reviewing whether your mother knowingly participated in the fraudulent applications." I didn't answer right away. "She didn't know," I finally said. "She didn't want to know." "But she didn't sign anything. You'll need to say that under oath." And so I did. I walked into that courtroom 3 days later wearing a charcoal blazer that hadn't seen sunlight since Harold's funeral. My palms were dry, my spine was straight. When the judge asked if I believed my mother was complicit, I said, "She may have failed to protect me, Your Honor, but she never signed a single thing. He did." Avis sat in the back, hands folded tightly in her lap, lips pressed so thin they vanished into her face. She didn't cry. She didn't nod. But she didn't look away either. After the hearing, I didn't return to my house right away. I drove instead to the title office downtown, where Carmine had arranged the final paperwork. The lien against my childhood home had been hanging like a ghost over my mother's name, threatening to dissolve decades of memory into auction blocks and court filings. Quietly, without ceremony, I bought the house back. The clerk looked at me as I signed. "You're not adding your mom's name to the deed?" "No," I said, gently. "Not this time." Carmine and Lenora had helped behind the scenes. Lenora said it felt like reclaiming something stolen from both of us. Carmine just said, "Because someone had to." I never told my family. I didn't need the gratitude. I needed the boundary. That evening, I returned to the house. I walked each room alone. The kitchen still had the chipped tile by the sink where I dropped a mug at 16. The hallway still creaked on the third step. In the back bedroom, the one that used to be mine, I opened an old drawer and found a crumpled drawing taped to the inside. A stick figure with brown hair holding hands with another figure labeled Mom. I stood there a long time. We don't always heal what's broken. Sometimes, we just carry it better. In the days that followed, something shifted in how people saw me. The mail lady left a bouquet of daisies on my porch with a note. "For your strength." A woman at the grocery store tapped me on the shoulder, whispered, "Thank you. You spoke when most of us stayed quiet." Even Mr. Elridge, who never once waved in the 20 years I'd lived here, gave me a nod from his porch. One afternoon, I returned from a quiet walk to find a certified letter tucked neatly beneath my front door. No return address. Inside, a handwritten note on thick stationery. "You may think you've won, but I never play just one game at a time." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. I folded it once, placed it in a file folder marked Final Phase, and slid it into the drawer with everything else. My hand didn't shake. My breath didn't stutter. It wasn't fear I felt. It was the recognition of an enemy who still didn't know me. It wasn't fear I felt. It was the recognition of an enemy who still didn't know me. I folded the letter without reading it again. The script was unmistakable. Harlan's heavy-handed slant, the same one he'd used on forged signatures for years. I didn't respond. Didn't burn it either. I just placed it in the back of the drawer, beneath the affidavit copies and evidence logs. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left for him to threaten that I hadn't already faced. That evening, my phone rang. It was Avis. The first time since the hearing, she didn't start with hello, just breathed into the silence for a few seconds, then said, "I don't know how to forgive you, but I don't think I can blame you either." The line didn't crack. Neither did I. "I didn't do it for you," I said quietly. "I did it because it was right." More silence. Then she hung up. That was our peace treaty. Not a warm one, Not signed or celebrated, but something real in its stillness. I didn't call back. She didn't either. The next few weeks passed like slow breath. I went back to work, small consulting jobs, referrals that came quietly. It started with a local bakery needing their taxes redone. Then a flower shop, a retired contractor who said, "I hear you're the kind of woman who doesn't miss a detail." A neighbor I barely knew left tulips on my porch in a mason jar. No note, just the gesture. One woman at the grocery store stopped me near the dairy aisle. "You're her, right? From the article? About the forgery stuff?" I nodded. "You did the right thing, for the rest of us who couldn't." I thanked her, but the words stayed with me longer than they should have. By the end of the month, I was spending less time checking the locks, more time rebuilding my rhythm. I clipped the article she mentioned, the one that described me as an anonymous whistleblower who brought justice into her own hands, and taped it to my fridge. Not for pride. Just so I wouldn't forget the weight of what it had cost. But for every step forward, something fell behind. I noticed the silence first on social media, then in texts. The cousins who used to send chain messages stopped altogether. My sister Clara blocked me. Someone from our church sent me a screenshot of a group chat thread. Rowenna brought shame on the family to look like a hero. Maybe I had, or maybe I just stopped pretending silence was safer than truth. You don't lose people when you speak the truth. You lose people when you stop pretending. One morning, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I hadn't touched since the last court filing. It held every file I'd created since the first forged loan, contracts, statements, printouts, screenshots, notes, all of it. I sat with them for a long time, then reached for a small USB, labeled it, closed but not forgotten. I slipped it into a fireproof lockbox, closed the latch, exhaled, no ceremony. Just the act of finally letting it be done. The next day, I found myself walking past the courthouse. I didn't plan it. I'd gone to drop off forms at the tax office and took the longer route back. The street was quieter than usual. Still, that's when I saw him. Harlan. He was in handcuffs, flanked by two officers, head slightly bowed but eyes scanning the sidewalk. And then he saw me. For a second, we locked eyes. He looked away. I didn't stop, didn't slow, just kept walking. Because the part of me that needed him to see me was gone. I didn't look back, because the part of me that needed him to see me was gone. The courthouse doors felt colder than I remembered, but I walked past them without breaking stride. My heels clicked evenly against the pavement, as if each sound was erasing a part of the weight I'd carried. There are verdicts the court gives, and ones we carry in our bones. That morning, Harlan took a plea deal. 8 years. Wire fraud, falsifying federal documents, identity theft. The sentencing was short, clinical. The judge read out the charges like grocery items. I sat in the gallery, unmoved, flanked by Carmine on one side and a man from the U.S. Attorney's office on the other. Harlan didn't turn to look at me. Not once. His new lawyer, pale, stiff, unseasoned, kept his head low. I caught him flinching once when the restitution order was read aloud. Full repayment to both Avis and me, plus a federal lien on his remaining properties. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like closure, in a language only silence could speak. When the judge invited me to address the court, I stood and walked to the podium. My voice was steady. "I didn't fight to win," I said. "I fought to stop being stolen from." No one moved, not even Harlan. The clerk blinked twice. That was all. Afterward, I didn't go home. I went to the house. It had sold a week earlier to a young couple with 2 toddlers. The final papers were signed. All that remained was one envelope I'd taped inside the kitchen cabinet, behind where the coffee mugs used to hang. It read, "This home has seen betrayal and healing. May it bring you more of the latter." Then I closed the door behind me one last time. On the way back to the city, I stopped at a small office near the Legal Aid Center. They were expecting me. "Rowenna Whitmore," the woman behind the counter smiled. "You're the one with the family fraud case, right?" I nodded. "We've read everything." You'd be a perfect speaker for the next seminar on domestic financial manipulation. I handed her a flash drive. This has everything, but I'm not the hero of this story. She paused. Then who is? I didn't rise, I said. I just refused to stay down. I declined the ride home, choosing instead to walk the 6 blocks to my new rental. The air was warmer than usual for spring, heavy with salt from the coast. I stopped once to buy an ice cream cone from a truck playing a tune too cheerful for the day, and laughed quietly at the absurdity of it. When I reached my front door, there was no mail, no subpoenas, no surprises, just peace, but I had one last thing to do. I walked to the beach, only 4 blocks away, pulled Harlan's last letter from my bag, the one that said, "You may think you've won, but I never play just one game at a time." I opened it, read it again, then tore it into 4 pieces and let the wind do the rest. The waves rolled in without fanfare. He wrote his story with lies. I rewrote mine with truth. And then I stepped into the tide, barefoot, steady, finally writing the chapter that was only mine.